Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Brown and I'm representing Home Sacket. We're the New South Wales State Coordinators of the Making More from Sheep program. I welcome you tonight to our one of our weekly webinars that we're running as part of the Making More from Sheep summer webinar series. Tonight's webinar is going to be on prioritising pasture expenditure for the year ahead. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just introduce the webinar platform to those who are uninitiated with it. Now, you should be able to hear me, but I actually can't hear you. This control panel that you can see on the left of your screen now should be sitting up on the right-hand panel, and you're able to collapse or bring that panel up by using that red button there, so you can see all the slides as we progress through the evening. Now, that box down the bottom of the control panel is quite important. That's where you let us know if you can or you can't hear us, and that's where you start logging your questions, because at the end of this evening, Phil Graham, our presenter, has kindly offered to stick around to answer all the questions that may be relevant to you and your business. And as you go through the webinar, just write them in that box there. Please be articulate. Don't leave too much for me to interpret, otherwise it makes it hard to ask Phil the questions. And just log them up there and we'll answer them in chronological order as we progress or at the end of the webinar. Now, if anyone wants to put in the temperature or whether they've had a bit of rain or what the footy scores are in there, then it helps me know that you can see it and that we're on track. Yep, we get a few people logging in there, which is good. Thank you for that. Hi from Jury, good to see you. So just quickly, tonight's program has been funded by an AWI and MLA initiative, Making More from Sheep. Now, this program is an excellent program. I'm going to tempt fate here and just show you tonight's webinar is being run from the Module 7 of the Making More from Sheep website. If you just go online, type in Making More from Sheep or MMFS, you'll get this website up. And then you can go in and have a look at a number of modules there that could be relevant to your business. This one tonight's Module 7 about pasture, and if you go into that, you'll soon see a few tools and tips and a lot of information there that are a great resource for livestock producers just about wherever you are. Now, tonight's presentation is being delivered by Phil Graham. Phil Graham, Technical Specialist of the New South Wales DPI, based in Yass. Now, Phil has 10 years of private agricultural, Phil had 10 years in private agriculture before joining the New South Wales DPI in 1988, and now Technical Specialist in Livestock Production Systems. He covers both sheep and cattle. His area of expertise is understanding livestock production systems and working out the changes that will improve profits without increasing risk. These factors obviously change as you move around the state and enterprises. Phil works with producer groups, funding bodies, local land services, universities and private companies to determine the key drivers in different production systems. This also includes issues facing mixed farming systems. So Phil is also very well developed in this area. He's actually been in part of the development and delivery of courses such as ProGraze Plus, and the development of tools, stock plan, and the pasture investment analysis or decision support tool, the 5 easy steps. So with that, I'm going to introduce Phil to the webinar. Just give me 1 second while I get Phil online. G'day Phil, how are you going?
Thanks Dave. Very well. Good evening ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
We're right to go, Dave?
Yeah, we just got your, if you start your, that's perfect Phil, I'll hear you in half hour.
Got it? Rightio. Well, good evening ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for taking the time to do this, and thanks to Dave for doing the organisation. Where to invest the money? I've got 4 key headings there. Pastures. The key issue new pastures or any pasture work in grazing country is the persistence of species we're going to choose to put in. Jim Vergana did work a number of years ago and went and looked at about 60 or 80 paddocks across the southwest slopes which had been sown about 8 or 10 years earlier. And really, what did he find? He found phalaris and sub in those pastures, but a lot of the other species that were put in had disappeared. Pastures have a long payback time of about 7 years. And if you have persistence problems on top of that, so you've sown 6 species and 5 years later there's only a couple of left, the payback time is going to stretch out even further. It's my view that the sowing of new pastures should be the last decision or the last resort. I think you should be trying other things first. A number of times I'll see people sow a new pasture, improve they've improved their fertility at the same time, and they sort of look at that and say, oh, well, look at the improvement I got from the pasture. When I'm talking about pastures, I'm really just talking about the species, and let's keep fertility as a separate issue. And that's why I believe that we can get fertility right. If we still haven't got a pasture that is performing at the level you want to perform at, then you start looking about what can I do with species. And also, if we're going into paddocks, if 30% of the paddock's a problem and the rest's okay, why do we sow the whole paddock? I'll see that time and time again. Why don't we just spend the dollars in that part of the paddock that has got a real issue rather than putting money over the whole lot? Lime, I've put a bit of a summary on the screen there at the front. I think if we're in the cropping system, yes, lime's essential. If we're sowing pastures, I think lime has a role, yes, but I think we can have a good think about what rate we're doing and whether we're broadcasting the lime over the whole paddock or we're using the prill line put down in the beneath the seed. Why do I think about rates? If we're on acid country and all we're really trying to do is get that top area where the seed is going to be establishing from, get rid of the aluminium, we don't need 2.5 tonne of lime to do that. We can do it with lower amounts. The third bit is on sown pastures. So these are pastures that are already there, sown. Have I seen benefit of lime applied to those paddocks? No, I haven't. And I'm basing that answer no on 30 years of experience, which has involved being involved in 4 major lime trials, being involved in a number of minor ones, and also with producers. And I was recently talking to Peter Simpson, the old DA from Goulburn, and he said you could most likely add another 20 years of experience of Peter, which didn't overlap with mine. So we may be talking about 45 years experience, and Peter's view is the same. And all the work he did on sown pastures on the tablelands environment we've got acid soils, he was not finding a meaningful response. And when I say that, I'm not saying that the lime didn't work. The lime worked. The pH changed. The aluminium was dropped. But I'm talking about it from a point of view, did you get a decent return on money invested? And the answer was no. And I'll come back to lime a bit later. In terms of fertiliser, on responsive country, it will give you the best internal rate of return if you've got the stocking rate to make use of the extra grass you grow. So there are people who are putting fertiliser on country that is no longer responsive. Why? Because it's already got enough nutrients in the system, and putting more on, it's gone past the point where it's going to respond. And we can look at that a bit later. If I go and improve the fertiliser level and therefore my pasture production, but don't do anything about utilising that with stock and turning it into money, obviously you're not going to get a return. So it's a combination of getting, making sure your country is responsive, getting it up, and then matching the stocking rate so you turn that extra grass into a product. Weeds is one which often gets forgotten about. The comment there, from my experience, to be successful on weeds, you need to be using at least 2 methods. Cultivation, spraying. Down the bottom I'll point out fertiliser is a control method because it's the one that can act on the seed by reducing the amount of bare ground. Just about every weed we deal with, it's an issue that there's bare ground for that seed to come up in, the weed seed to come up in. If we can increase the vigour, decrease the amount of bare ground, we automatically start reducing the amount of seed that's going to germinate. When it comes to using the other methods, I think we really have to be clear in our head what are the weeds we're dealing with. So I've talked about invasive weeds, serrated tussock and African lovegrass are two that I see a fair bit around here. Invasive weeds you have to do something about. Those on the Monero are well aware of what happens if you just sit back and let African lovegrass take over, and it's now threatening very productive parts of the Monero, and it's already happened down here around Yass in terms of serrated tussock. So invasive weeds, you've definitely got to be taking action, because if you don't, you just lose your country. You're losing your capacity to make money. When we come to seasonal weeds, Patterson's curse, etc., I'm less gung-ho about spending money on those. I'd much rather tackle some of those weeds we get from autumn environments via fertiliser than via herbicides. If we're talking about barley grass and the impact of seeds in lamb skins, that's a different story. We need to take action, but that's quite a clear action what we're taking. The barley grass is great in autumn. It'll be great in this autumn. We just want to stop the damage caused by the seed. So that might be a case of taking action on a couple of paddocks which you can graze the lambs in that period when it's difficult. So I think when it comes to weed control, be very clear what the problem is you're tackling, and don't walk away from the invasive one, because in 2 or 3 years' time you'll regret that decision. That's interesting. I've just lost my... Here we go. Lime on established pastures. In the last fortnight, I've got into a bit of trouble from a whole range of sources on this, so I just wanted to go through why I was saying no. The roots grow well below the soil depth that we can alter with lime. So if I look at the work I've been involved with, by top dressing sown paddocks, we've had an effect down to 15 centimetres. That's the most we've had, from 2.5 tonne. We've got one site we're working on at present. In 2 years we've only had an impact in 2.5 centimetres. So if you've got a productive pasture there, those species must already have the capacity to handle the aluminium. It's the free aluminium which is really the issue, it's not the pH. Because if the species weren't able to have the aluminium, that pasture just wouldn't be performing to start off with. Natural selection has already occurred in our sowing pastures. The genetic material within a species that can handle the free aluminium are the plants that are already growing. They're the ones that grow, they're the ones that will seed down. Give you an example. Sowing subclover on some country out the back of Yass, pH of 3.8 and 60% aluminium. There's native grasses in there, you drop subclover seed on it. The seed will germinate, most likely 60% of that seed will then die, but there is always a percentage of plants that will survive and they will perform. They seed down, and the next year all the seed is coming from those plants which have the capability of handling those pretty harsh conditions. If we look at the advanced AT Phalaris line, which is the last AT standing for acid tolerant, the last line that Richard Coleman at Ciro developed, how did he do it? He took existing lines, he went to challenging sites down to a pH of 3.8, he planted them, and he selected the plants that grew the best in that material. They became the parent material on which to breed the new lines. So the genetic potential to handle that challenging soil was already in the Phalaris lines we had, and that's the point I made above. It's already been in there, and we've sown these pastures, and the plants to some degree have already done the selection, so we go and plonk lime on top and we get surprised we don't get a response. Really, if we think it through, we shouldn't be surprised. And most of the native species that grow in acid soils, they worked these mechanisms out thousands and thousands of years ago, so it doesn't worry them one iota. I'll just pause a bit because Dave pointed out to me that when I change a slide it takes a while for everyone to see it, so I've got a little screen with a green marker on. watch to come up. This is some work. You'll see quite a few of the slides I'll put up. I'll have Richard Simpson's name down the bottom. Richard's a research scientist at CSIRO in Canberra, who and I have worked very closely together for nearly 25 years. This is some work done out at the Kiora site, which I'll show you more about. That's where I've run a long-term grazing demonstration. The results you're seeing here is what's called an extractive trial. So you put out all known nutrients that plants need. So that's got all of them. This one's got all plus lime. That's just an interesting one. Putting the lime in the system hasn't really made much difference in terms of pasture growth. The only things that are significant are the ones that have got percentage figures on it. Everything else, if it's above or below, is not significant. We leave phosphorus out of the system, so all the other nutrients in there except phosphorus. This one's got all other nutrients in except potassium, and you keep working your way along. And that is a typical sort of response we see time and time again. There'll be some of you in this webinar who are lucky enough to sit on basalt soils, and you can forget about phosphorus because those soils are high enough. So if we did that down there, phosphorus won't show up, but sulphur will. So we get hit to the tune of 50% of pasture production if we don't do something about the pea, and that's why, to a large degree, for many years, pea has been the focus of a lot of programs that have been run around the state. This is a slide of how phosphorus moves in the grazing system. It's one done by Alan Richardson, another researcher at CSIRO in Canberra. You could also get rid of the letter P and put S and K and a whole lot of other nutrients. They all behave very similar. I think it's just important that people understand what's going on under our soils and why we're seeing what we're seeing as we move a pasture from point A to point B. There's basically 4 pools that the phosphorus is going to sit in. There's the soil solution pool, and that it has to be in that form for the plant to take it up. The plants can only take phosphorus up in one form. We then have the inorganic P, so this is phosphorus that's bound to clay particles. Does it come off those clay particles? Yes, it does, but it's slow. We have the organic P area, which is old plant material or animal residues, or residues that we've plonked on from other animals. So we go and get pig manure and plonk on, that's a residue, and that all ends up in this organic P level. And then we have this microbial plot. These microbes need P and S themselves for their function. So they will, in fact, these microbials will go into this soil solution and grab P. They're actually competing for the plant for P at certain times. When we get a pasture up and running, effectively what we're doing is building these 2 pools here. We build the organic pool. If we build the organic pool, of course that's the feed source for the microbial, this pool gets bigger. This one doesn't change that much, that one stays much the same. So over time what we do is we build these 2 drivers of our production system. So at the Bookham site, Richard did some work. For the amount of pasture production we grow, we use about 33 kilograms of phosphorus a year for the leaf and root production. Out of the bag, we're putting in 6. So there's a substantial lot got to come from other sources. Most of that is coming out of these pools. So the Kiora site is now strongly driven by the phosphorus that is cycling through these pools. That's what's really driving the production. It's not what I'm putting on from the bag. What I'm putting out of the bag is just to keep it ticking over. We put on rock phosphate. It's virtually straight into the inorganic pool because that's in a form that the plant can't take up. So we're relying on various methods to get into this soil solution pool. A lot of what I'm talking about tonight, there's a booklet that we put out about 5 or 6 years ago called 5 Easy Steps. It's available off the MLA website, downloaded for free. This covers a lot of the points that I'm talking about. So if some of the things are foreign to you and new, I suggest that you get onto the website, download this, and it sort of steps through. I'm covering tonight sort of points 1, 2 and 4 in this talk. That gives you the complete picture. Well worth getting your hands on. The concept of, I made the comment earlier about the country has to be responsive to P if you're going to get a good return. So if we've got country out here, so this is phosphorus down the bottom in the coal wall, and this is pasture growth up the y-axis. As we increase P levels, we get increased pasture production. We get to a point which we call the critical point, and after that it flattens off. From a business point of view and getting a return, we want to work in that part of the curve, because from a return point of view, working out here, you're just throwing money away. The other thing, if we're out here, we also, this is about the only area where we've ever measured phosphorus in the water that's running over the top of soils, top of paddocks, runoff water. So in paddocks that are way above where they need to be, we can measure phosphorus leaving the system. That's a no-no for your own bank account, but it's also a no-no from an environmental point of view. We need to run systems where we can hold our head up high and say with great confidence we're not having impacts off farm. So the key thing then is finding out where this point is for your property. The way we do it is we use a test that's been around for about 10 or 12 years called the phosphorus buffering index. This test has been around since about the 1960s. I remember it being talked about when I was at uni, in the early 70s I might add. But it was never around, it was a 5-day test, so it was never going to be something that producers could access because no lab would ever run it. It was in the early 2000s that a lady in Victoria doing a PhD turned it from a long test to a 17-hour test, so now it becomes something we can get the labs to run. There is no such thing as a good PBI or a bad PBI. Well, having said that, most likely if you're at the extremes, it's not good in most things, but the rest, don't look at one as being good as one as being bad. It's not. This is just telling us what's the capacity of your soil to absorb and hold on to phosphorus. So at the lower numbers, think about it as a small sponge with big holes. At this top end, think about it as a big sponge with very small holes that can soak up more water. All we want to use this for is to tell us what the critical value is. So this is coal wall P. This is the info we get on a soil test, and we just want to know in our soil types across our properties. On some places it'll be very uniform. On some you might get two distinct groupings. What's the coal wall figure where I don't want to go past? Because if I go past that, I'm not making money. I'm just not achieving anything. That's the only reason we want the PBI, is to get us this number. And this is a number I think every grazier who's wants productive pastures, it's a number they should have in their head to some degree. But if we just want to go on, one of the problems with this is that we then have a coal wall P, which is our current test, and we have a critical P, which is again a coal wall. And people will get confused. So again, this was an idea that Richard floated a number of years ago. Let's just simplify it by turning it into an index. So what do? We take our current soil test, we divide it by our critical value. So if the current soil test is 19, and from our PBI we've worked out a critical value is 25, 19 over 25, we just get an index. Now, if that index gets to 1 or above, we're at maximum production. We don't really want to be above 1. If we're below 1, we're in the area where we want to be. That's the responsive part of the curve. So what it does is just brings it back to one number, and there's another benefit which we'll see in a minute. Sulphur is often forgotten about because the vast amount of the fertiliser which has the major coverage across the industry has always been single super, which handles both P and S. So in a lot of cases, in people making decisions on P, they've automatically handled their S. But you don't hear it discussed much. But it would be most likely for the vast bulk of people the second most limiting nutrient, and certainly we get onto basalts, it becomes the major thing that you focus on. Now, it's a bit different. We have the critical value is sort of a range of 6 to 10. So we grab the number in the middle. It's about 8. So everyone has that same sort of value. So if our current soil test for sulphur is 4.5, divided by 8, we get another index. Same principle. We don't want to be above 1. If we're below 1, we're in the area where things are responsive. So if you've got those two indexes, then what you can start doing is producing looking at data like this. So you'll see that there's 834 paddocks on that. It's come off 170 properties, and all of this data was collected by producers in late 2006. And we know, because of the various programs that this came out of, that people used a robust sampling system to get the right soil in the bag, i.e. that each core was 10 centimetres. They took at least 30 to 40 cores per sample. They know where they've taken them on the paddock, so they can go back to the same spot. So it's a very good data set. So down the bottom we have the P index. On the y-axis we have the S index. So there's the line going up there, which is just at a little bit above 1. And the S1, sulphur sulphur can be leached. So if you think of what 2006 was like, incredibly wet. So instead of drawing the line at 1, I've brought it down to 0.8 a bit, just sort of on the basis that all our sulphur levels are lower this year because of how the season's been. We will tend to get a rebound like that. With phosphorus, you get a very solid measure of your levels from a 10 centimetre core. Once we come to things like sulphur and potassium and nitrogen, etc., because they're nutrients that move down through the profile, the 10 centimetre soil core no longer gives us as solid data as we get from P. So that's the reason I've done a fudge and put it down a bit. If we just look up here in the top right hand corner, 38% of the paddocks have got a P index above 1.1. My view is once you get above 1.5, there is no way in the world that you should be putting any P in the system. You've just got a lot of P here you can run down. Why have we got so many paddocks out here? Because of the sampling. So these samples range from Bombala to Moss Vale. So we've got 3 areas in there where we get basalt soils, the Monero, the Cookville region and the Southern Highlands. So some of these soils out here are because of the basalt origin with high Ps. Some of the ones right out the end here is because people have used poultry manure or products like that. If you put large sums of those sorts of products on, the first year you do a soil test after they go on, you get this incredibly high phosphorus reading, and then the next year it'll drop down to something more sensible. So some of those I know because we've checked them up. Quite a few of those really high ones revolve around poultry manure. You'll see this block, the vast bulk though are in this very responsive box down here where both P and S are limiting. This area I've sort of marked with the yellow, it's my view that when you're starting to get numbers in that area, so these are paddocks which are pretty productive. I think you've most likely reached a state where you just want to maintain your P and S, certainly your P levels. If you're way down the bottom here for S, you might be maintaining your P levels, but you might want to put some S into the system to push it up. I regard that as sort of the maintenance phase. If we're out here, we should be thinking about just pulling out. We still need S in the system down here. These we don't need anything. We can walk away from those paddocks for a while and just monitor them and see how they regress back into the area we'd like them to be. And then if you're down this bottom area, it again comes to personal choice what you're trying to do, but you're certainly in an area here where you might want to do a bit of building and just not maintenance. This is the Bookham site, which has been running continuously since 1993, and I've expressed it in a P index basis. So you'll see the 2 red lines, one at 1 and one at about 0.7. that's where I've been trying to manage my P levels over the years. So we started off at very low levels. For a coal wall reading, that was down at 7. This country had not seen any fertiliser since 1972 when the superphosphate bounty was taken off. So it went for 21 years with nothing in terms of fertility. It took 6 years at about 125 to build. But I just want to concentrate on this back end. And really what I'm saying is, I take annual, so this annual soil testing going on. There was a soil test done in here. It's just I've never been able to find the sheet of paper. So write it down, record it somewhere where you're not going to lose it. We take the soil tests in at the end of spring, but before things dry off. So I always aim at soil core when I can push the core into the paddock easily without having to push it down with my feet. So you learn in your country when's the time to go. So but we want to do it towards the end of spring. So we're sampling at our lowest level. Most of the P would have been taken out of the system in that spring growth. So it gives us a good stable reading. So here we are, soil test sitting in the range, and the decision was to run with 70 kgs a single super, which I think in this area is our maintenance rate. Soil test didn't change. I went again with 70 kg of single. It's all single super. I went with another 70 kg. But you'll notice up here there's 160. For the first time the fertiliser spreader got confused, so he went and plonked another 90 kgs on, so we've got 160 put on. We get a big lift. That's in an area where I don't want to be, so the decision there was we'll put nothing on. We go from there to there. We put another 70 on, go from there to there. Why is it 66 and not 70? I'm just using 20 kilo bags, and the retailer was one short and giving it, so it ended up being 66 and not 70. And we jumped from there to there. So, 70 that year does that, 70 in that year does that, in this year 70 does that. We're back at a level where I didn't want to be. We're above my target, so I decided no fertiliser goes out. And as you'll see, I've really been sitting for a fair bit of the time at the upper limit. I most likely would have preferred to sit in the middle. So that year nothing went out, and I went a second year without putting anything out, and then that gave me a soil test down there. I went with 88 kg. Why a bit more? Because I wanted to put MO back into the system, because it hadn't received MO since here. So that had been a big gap. I'd been checking it through there, but we had 3 MOs in here, and we can find we can really stretch out our MO rate application times. We put 88 on, bounced up there, and the decision for this year I think I made tonight just sitting beforehand, and I'm not going to fertilise. So we're up at the top, we'll run. So what's driving the system when I'm not putting P in? Remember I talked about that organic pool and that microbial pool. On this site this is built up massively, and we know that because we've done tests to look at soil carbon, and the soil carbon is giving us a measure of how our organic matter is built up. So I'm going to rely on some of that organic matter to keep driving the system. These years I didn't put anything on. There was absolutely no difference I could pick up in terms of productivity off the country. It's running 8.5 ewes to the hectare lambing in July. The progeny come off the paddock in November, so it's about a 12 to 13 DSE paddock. Since 2002, taking account what's put on in the years we haven't put anything on, that paddock has consistently run somewhere in the order of 13 to 14 DSE, and it's had 55 kilograms of single super per year over that time, which I think is just fantastic. The cost in inputs is low, but we're running that at a level we're very happy with. One of the big things that 5 Easy Steps did compared to other ones is, if we just look at the soil test, it's an agronomic decision. If we really want to look at it from a business decision, we need to link stocking rate to our soil fertility. And this is explained in more details in the booklet. But we know from some work the Victorians did that we can get an idea of a responsiveness for our particular area. And what we use is the number of months of growing season. So there's a table in the booklet, and for instance, if you sort of think in your place, well, I reckon on about seven months of growing season, and that out of the table you'll come up with a DSE rating. And all this work went back to the Triple P program run in the late 90s and 2000s, and Jeff Saul and one other colleague in Victoria analysed all that data and came up with this and found growing season length was the best thing to predict potential stocking rates. So when we get the paddock up to our critical value, we can use this table to work out what our potential stocking rate is. So that's the top. We have from our own experiences, what's the potential stocking rate of the country when it's at its lowest level. Got 2 points, draw a line. Now, on a property, your flats are going to have a different curve to your hills, because your hills, due to a whole, could be soil depth, could be aspect, a whole range of things, is going to have a shorter growing time, so therefore the curve looks a bit different, or the line looks different. But then what we want to do is, if this is where we are, and I haven't put anything there, but this is our current soil tests are around this area, where's our stocking rate sitting? So if this is our stocking rate, what's it telling us is that we're most likely pushing the system a bit harder than the capacity of the pasture. So what's our decision? We could improve fertility, keep our stock numbers the same and improve fertility, so we'll move that point to there. We could accept that we're above and we're going to fill that gap with supplementary feed, or we could do some destocking. So there's 3 potential decisions you could make going there. Likewise, you could be down here. Again, what's the choice? Our choice is to keep that number but let fertility drop a bit. We could increase stock numbers to get it in capacity. But what some of the producers will do is they'll say, well, that's where we want to set our breeding, our core breeders at. We want to sit them below, so we've got some robustness in them, and then the gap between that and the line is something we'll fill with a trading operation. There's various ways of doing it, but once you have get some idea of what your responsiveness is and where you are sitting in relation to that, it's very powerful in helping you fine-tune your decision making, especially in years when cash flow might be under pressure for a variety of reasons. So the last part of this is just on what's the economics of putting this together. These are the livestock gross margins from New South Wales DPI. The beef ones, there's 4 up the end here. The beef ones were from early in 2016, and the sheep ones were averaged the last 6 months of 2016 for prices and costs. So what have we got? We sort of the lowest gross margin in here, and these are aimed at just average productions. This is by no means the top, it's by no means the worst. There will be certainly people in the industry doing better than that, and there will certainly be people in the industry doing worse. So, you know, it's we're about $27 there, and if we go up the top, we're about $47 for the steers, and there's a lot of them sort of sit in that $30 to $35 range. So that was just to set the picture for the next one. Just out of interest, I did it the other day with the current, redid the sheep ones with the current prices, and the 18 micron gross margins have gone from this level up to above $50 with the behaviour of the wool market. Now, what's the cash flow of moving from 10 DSE to 12 DSE over 4 years? So here's a decision. I want to improve the carrying capacity. I want to increase the number of stock I'm running because I just need to generate more money into the business. And you look back on that previous response curve, and yes, that is possible within your system. And you're comparing the zero going across, so this is cash flow on the left, and these are the number of years going across, and I've done it for 3 gross margins. The blue is for 25, the green is 35, and the red is 47. So that's the top of the game. That's sort of the sort of median figure for a lot of livestock gross margins that we just looked at, and this is below, but there's would be a lot of producers who would still be below this line. So you're comparing each of these with this flat line. So this is the one, it's the same operation. We're trying to move the fertility by the same amount and increase the same stocking rate over a 4-year period. It's just that the enterprises we can put on that have varying differences in capacity to make money. So obviously the one with the 47, you actually spend the same amount of money in fertiliser and livestock, but it's just that you don't go as deep here because of the money this one earns. You're able to cover that with income within a year, and also interest is not biting you. As the income earning capacity of your enterprise drops, the trough below the line will become greater and it takes longer to come out of it. So I've calculated the internal rates of return for these three. Often it's talked about an internal rate of return in agriculture because of risk factor. You're really looking for an internal rate of return of 15% before you might say that's a sensible decision. So up here, these two are well over. This one's most likely in the questionable area. So people will say to me, I can't make any money out of fertiliser and improving stocking rate. If people are running pretty poor livestock enterprises, they have accurately summed up their situation. Fertiliser is not going to override a poor operation. So running more of a poor operation is not a good business decision. You'd be far better to look at spending the money in trying to work out what's causing this enterprise to be low and fixing that before you would be spending fertiliser. Or, as it was pointed out at the workshop the other day, if someone in getting those extra stock got stock which had a higher income earning capacity, well then it would improve that a bit. So the bottom line of 5 easy steps is be clear about where your targets are for soils, be clear about where you're sitting in terms of stocking rate and the capacity of your country, and then make sure that the enterprises you're running are such that it ends up being a good business decision. You put the 3 things together and people are making and can make a lot of money from fertiliser. And because it's simpler, I think it's the place people should start off. Weeds are a special category, remember that. If you've got invasive weeds, it's got to be part of your decision making. And I believe, fix fertility first, and if you're still not happy, then look at what you can do in terms of bringing new species in rather than start at new species and go the other way. I think this is a far safer, a better business way of doing that. That's it, Dave. Just a couple of things. The 5 Easy Step booklet you can get from the MLA website. I went there yesterday and checked it is. But also there's a very long address there. Alan Richardson, Dr. Alan Richardson from CSIRO gave a YouTube talk about 12 months ago now on that whole pea cycle. It takes about 45-50 minutes. It is without doubt one of the best talks I have heard on the phosphorus story in terms of how all the bits fit together. I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but I've never heard anyone give a better talk than that one of Alan. So if you've got time, it is well worth a look. Thanks, Dave.
Perfect, Phil, thank you. That was spot on, and I think I speak on behalf of the whole audience that it was very well done and very well presented, so thank you for that. Now, Phil, I'm just going to give you a break there for a second, and while Phil's just having a rest there after a good presentation, I'd just like to welcome everyone to stick around for a while, because Phil's kindly offered to answer a few questions that might be relevant to you and your business, up until, after this. And so if you've got a few questions there, pop them in that box that we saw. There's a few coming through there, Phil, so we've got a few online, which is really good, and we'll answer them in chronological order as we go along. Now, before we start doing that though, next week we have a very exciting webinar run by another dynamic and informative speaker in Andrew Woods of Independent Commodity Services. Now, Andrew is one of the market gurus for wool, and he's going to be presenting to us on the where the market's at with regards to wool quality discounts, how this compares to history and what it means for the future. So for the wool producers out there that are trying to make good strategic decisions around their breeding and their wool preparation and marketing processes, then I highly recommend coming along to this webinar Wednesday next week at 8 p.m. and listen to Andrew Woods as he steps us through where the wool quality discounts are at and what this may mean for our management on farm. Now, a few of you may wish to duck off. I know it's getting late. Don't forget the post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen when you leave, when you cancel out of the webinar, or when I shut the webinar down after the question time. We very much value your input. Please leave some recommendations for improvement of the webinar series. We're always working on making them better, and if you've got constructive feedback, please leave it. If you've got praise, please leave it as well, because I'll pass that on to Phil and pass that on to MLA. Now, Phil, good news is that we've got a few questions coming through here, and I was wondering whether you'd be ready there to answer them.
Fire away.
Righto, thanks Phil. So Phil, Wayne asks, quick question, what about sowing into pugged pastures?
Rightio.
And you're not, if you want more context, we can always ask for that.
Yeah, no, look, I think as soon as we go to something like that, the vast bulk of our pasture seed are pretty small, so I would have seen more failures in pasture sowing because the seed ended up too deep than for any other reason. So the thing I think with pugged pastures is your ability to get the right depth placement is going to be difficult, and that will be influenced by what equipment's available. If at the end of the day you can't get anything, it's going to be up and down to some degree. There's no point putting some of those grass seeds in that are very, very small, because the chances are a lot of it's going to just could end up too deep. Maybe that's a case, if you get conditions are right, of where you might be better just to try and drop it on top of the ground and roll it in. In my younger days, I was in Tasmania for 5 years, and a lot of pastures were successfully established purely for that, via that method. So my concern is if we're putting the seed under the ground, that our inability to get controlled depth could be the thing that would hurt you most. That's what you got to be. That's what you got to think through. That's the issue you got to deal with.
Right. Well, thanks, Phil. Phil, question here from Rodney. He asks, what about putting gypsum on sodic country?
Yeah, look, that's, once we get into sodic country, the role of gypsum plays, that's one of those smaller issues, but there is certainly that country around, and it can help deal with it. It's also country that you most likely you think long and hard about disturbing. If it is sodic, you open yourself up to losing it if you've worked it and the wrong weather comes through in terms of rainfall events. So you'd want to think long and hard if you are going to disturb it, in what form and when you're going to do it. But gypsum would be helpful there, and that'd be something where you'd need to get sort of direct advice to do the right thing.
Right, thanks, Phil. Rodney asked another question here. He also wants to know about clover not being able to fix nitrogen if aluminium is greater than 10%.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of discussion going around at present. That Bookham site which I showed you, aluminium in the top 10 centimetres is about 30%, and lower than that in the profile that goes higher. Those clover plants have nodules on them, and when we've done work looking at whether we get a response by putting nitrogen on, we do get a response, but it is very, very small, which is telling us that the nitrogen being produced by the legume component is pretty good in giving us a productive pasture. What the nodules will do in that environment is they will stay very close to the surface. So even on soils that have, the Bookham country is 4.2 to depth, but the top 2.5, 3 centimetres has most likely got a pH above 5 because of all the organic matter that's there. So the nodules will find themselves that little environment where they're quite happy to grow. And as I said, in theory we've got soils where we should have a problem. I was looking at some results that came back from Western Australia today, and they regarded our nodulation as at the very poor end of the scale, but we still get adequate nitrogen produced. So I think we just have to be careful that when we're looking at the nodules are there to produce nitrogen, we just want to make sure we don't get hung up on nodules and forget what they're doing. Alan Richardson, who I've talked about before, Alan did his PhD back in the 70s on nodulations in acid soils, and he's produced some very good papers on what happens. If people are really keen about that, Alan's papers are excellent reading. Thank you.
Right, thanks Phil, spot on. Phil, good question here from Philip. I think it pertains to your comments around liming established pastures. Now the question is, does the soil pH change over time? And if so, shouldn't lime be required to keep the same pH to maintain those already established pasture species?
If we've got a balance of grasses and clover, any change in pH is occurring at a rate that we don't detect. So if I look at, I've got 26 years data on the Bookham paddock now, pH will go up and down every year. It's not a constant, but in terms of the control paddock, it hasn't changed. So that's one thing. I go back to this thing. If we've got pastures established there, those pastures have already worked out ways of combating the free aluminium. So just because we put lime on, and what all the lime does is take away the free aluminium. It just ends up turning it into an insoluble form which can't be seen by roots. But things like the native grasses, they worked out this mechanism thousands of years ago. So we put lime on and then we say we don't get a response. Why is that? Because those species were already quite happy growing in this environment of high aluminium. We've got a paddock we're doing some work on at Lagan now which has got 70% aluminium. We're still growing the clover plants, we're still growing grasses. And if we get the P right, it becomes a far more productive pasture. So aluminium's been around longer than we have, and these species have had to deal with it. And it's the same with the comment I made about Richard Colvin's breeding program for the AT Phalaris line. There was no genetic engineering there to try and bring in a capacity to fight aluminium. That capacity was already sat in the Phalaris lines. So the plants we get natural selection when we've sown pastures, and so what we end up with species which have the capacity. So there isn't a need for us to put lime on to keep it in a certain box, because those plants are already quite happy working in a box which is outside what we can do. And I just remind, we can only change the top 15-20 centimetres at most. If I've got a strong native grass pasture, I'm going to have roots down at 30, 40, 50 centimetres, and they've got to be working down there, because if they're not working at that level, they're not picking that moisture up, which is going to give me a longer growing season. And there is nothing I can do, nothing we've ever been able to do. They've tried deep banding of lime, but that just becomes hideously expensive. It's the balance. Let's be clear about what we're going. If we spend the money, why are we doing it, and what are we going to achieve, compared to what the pastures have already worked out they can do. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, spot on, Phil. Thank you. Righto, Phil. Just to help guide you, we've got probably another 15 questions here in front of us of varying levels of complexity.
So you're suggesting I give short answers?
Well, just to help you guys, put your time.
Thanks. Yep.
But no, they're all good questions, and there's a good one here from, or a short one maybe from Maria. Maria asks, what is the equation to transfer Cobble P to Olsen P?
Very good question. I think our knowledge now is there's not one. With Olsen P, we don't use PBIs because the current view is if you've got an Olsen P of 15, that is your critical point. So in Olsen, you don't want to be above 15. The responsive part of the curve in Olsen is below 15. Maybe in another couple of years we might find that one figure will move around a bit between different soil types, but at present it's 15's your key point. So for Olsen it's a lot easier. It's just coal we needed the PBI to help us identify that critical value.
Right, yeah, thanks, Phil. They're testing your formulas. Another question here from Adam. Adam wants to know the formula to work out critical P, which is derived from your PBI.
If you look in the, if you download the booklet, you will see the equation written on page 2. So what they did, they analysed about 30 or 40 years of major fertiliser trials across southern Australia, and from that they developed the relationship. It's in the booklet, or if you're really excited and you want it, it is 19.6 plus 1.1 times PBI to the power 0.55. But it's in the book. You can pick it all up there.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Now, this question you might be able to interpret better than I can, Phil, but it's, do you use single super as the source of sulphur to be used? I think that's what.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, single super is by legislation it must be greater than 8.9% phosphorus, and it's about 11 or 13% sulphur. So you always have S and P in single super. In the majority of cases, putting the amount out to cover your P will normally cover your S. I actually think at some point down the track at Bookham that I might, because I've become more hard-nosed on P, there might be occasions where I've got to put a bit more S in the system. Once we go to soils where P is not a problem, S then is the problem, and then we decide which form of S we're going to use. Is it going to be a gypsum form, or is it going to be an elemental S form? That's how it sort of splits up. Right. Some products have both in them, P and S. Some fertilisers will only have one. Gypsum only has S, rock phosphate only has P.
Yep, right, thank you. Phil, good question here from Brian. He asks, in your cash flow moving from 10 to 12 DSE over 4 years, is this by buying more breeders, cattle, or retaining heifers and breeding your own extra cows?
Rightio. The way the program calculates that is it puts a cost of getting that extra DSE. Now, whether you breed your own or you buy them, both ways are a cost. Now, I'm not saying they're an equal cost, but if you keep extra animals, you are foregoing some income. So you haven't gone out and bought, but there is a cost in doing it. So the way we do, in that example there, I had a figure of $110 per DSE for the extra stock we bring in. Now, with cattle at present, I'm most likely a bit light.
Yeah, spot on. Thanks, Phil. Phil, a question here from Scott. Scott asks, will soil test results change during a growing season?
Absolutely. Our soils are a living organism. Even the movement of nutrients off clay particles, the inorganic side, that ebbs and flows depending on temperatures and moisture and a whole lot of things, and the biological bit ebbs and flows depending on temperatures and moistures. So you'll get periods when it'll be quieter, you'll get periods when it will take off. So the period that is most quiet is when our soils are bone dry, because biological activity comes to a halt. And the period when there's the most going on is most likely spring, when we've got moisture in the soil and the temperatures are up. Richard Simpson did some good work years ago where he did soil tests on paddocks every 6 weeks, and it goes up and down. So that's the important thing from a soil testing point of view, that if you're going to soil test and monitor, choose a time of the year when you can get reliable samples and do it at that time every year. So it's my view we're sort of doing it after the hump, after the peak of spring, but while we can get the samples out and we get some consistency. If you jump from month to month to month in taking soil tests, you're going to get variation, and some of that variation is just going to come because of the variation you get within the year. And what you're trying to get out of a soil test is to see what change has occurred due to the actions I have taken. So you want to minimise as much as you can, and you can never do it totally. You want to minimise all this other variation that will come about through sampling different areas, sampling at different times, etc.
That's spot on, Phil, and that answered a question that I had burning inside me too, about when the best time to take your soil tests were. Now, I'll just give you a break there just quickly, Phil. There's a few people that may need to duck off. Don't forget that survey that'll pop up after the webinar. Leave your thoughts and comments there for us, and I'll get them to MLA, and I'll also get them to Phil. Also, don't forget that next week we've got that another Making More from Sheep webinar featuring Andrew Woods of Independent Commodity Services. Andrew's a guru on wool marketing. He's going to be delivering on where the wool quality discounts are at, where they likely be in the future based on the past, and what this may mean for our management. So a few more questions, Phil. There's actually a few trickling in, but they're good ones, so let's keep on with them. Now, question here from Peter. He wants to know more about the role of sub-clover seeding when super is applied. When should we put seed in with the super?
Yeah, rightio. I suppose when the hair wasn't as grey and there's a bit more youth and spring in the stride, I got caught numerous times by saying to people, oh look, you're going to have to put seed out, there's absolutely no clover. And then we put the pea in the system. That then gave, there were clover plants there, they were just very small and you just miss them. We get pea in the system, and lo and behold, this paddock, which country that you would have thought they've never seen any clover seed in its life, there's adequate clover. So 90% of the time, I think if you fix your pea, the clover will look after itself. If you want to bring new varieties in, or for a variety of reasons you're not happy, look, you can very successfully strike clover by just dropping it on top of the ground, provided it's had the right seed treatments. You want all the seed treatments done with it. The glib answer is you want to throw it out sort of a week before the autumn rains come. Provided it's treated for ants, it will sit there for a while and protect. I wouldn't want to throw it out before I'm into April, and I'd like to get it done during April and May. The one thing I will say that is, as we're getting a bit of a dry trend, sometimes it's worth people thinking about maybe going to one earlier. Yeah, we have seeding dates within our, we've got early, mids and late seeding clovers. especially when you're getting on the western edge of the eastern edge of the cropping belt. I think we're getting to the point where we need some slightly earlier clovers in the system as well. Just the springs are becoming a bit more testy, and I think some areas have lost clover because we didn't quite have the right varieties. I'll finish there.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Phil. I feel a question here from Joe. How critical is matching sheep enterprise feed requirements to the pasture growth curve in achieving the most profitable outcomes?
It's very important, and you know, Dave, the benchmarking groups that your organisations run over the years, and sort of recommendations that have come out of that back up those sort of comments to really get the system extracting the most income out of your pasture system without pushing it over the top. You really need your livestock system, whatever it is, in sync with the pasture supply curve. You try and produce outside that. Yes, in some years there might be marketing advantages, but I think it's fair to say you most likely suffer a bit in overall profit by trying to do that. Now, for some people, the money they're making is still good enough, but if you're trying to extract as much out of it, matching livestock requirements to pasture supply will give you the best chance of doing it.
Right, well, thanks, Phil. Thank you. Quick question here from Ian. Ian's at Holbrook. To give you an idea of his region, he's asking about a seeding rate for phosphorus kilograms per hectare.
Yeah, look, you're starting to get me on shaky territory. Phosphorus is a small seed. Normally 3 kilos of phosphorus seed, and there might be 2 varieties there. Normally gives you enough plants. So provided everything else has been done right, you will get an adequate strike of phosphorus plants to drive your way. Quickest way to wreck up sowing a phosphorus pasture is sow ryegrass with it. We found this years ago when the ideas came in. You put different seeds down different drill rows on the combine. I think it only lasted for 18 months because it was such a pain in the backside that someone only did it once. But a few people up here did it, and the amazing thing was it just showed us the ryegrass seeds were out of the ground 3 to 4 weeks before the phosphorus and cocksfoots. So if they're all in the one drill row, the phosphorus seedling was just swamping the new phosphorus ones. The ryegrass seedlings were swamping the phosphorus ones, and we were losing them right at that early stage. So the one thing I learned years ago, if you want a success out of phosphorus and cocksfoot, those smaller seeds, don't combine them with big seeds.
Right, thank you, Phil. Phil, a question here from Sophia. She asks, if we wanted to improve our soil fertility and organic pea and spread manure, cattle manure from feedlots on our pastures, how often would you think we would need to do this?
Rightio. Sophia, a counterpart of mine here who I've worked with for 18 years, Fiona Leach, who was the DA with the department at YAS, and now she's with the LLS here at YAS. Fiona's done a lot of work with alternate fertilisers, and it could be worth contacting her, Fiona Leach at YAS LLS. The work with, we didn't have cattle manure, we had pig manure, but from what I've seen in terms of poultry and pig and cattle, I think it's fairly similar. We found we were getting 2 to 3 years out of those manures before their effectiveness disappeared, and that just depended a bit on rate. One of the issues with those products where people can get caught is that they're not a uniform product. So one year you might buy it and it might have 60% dry matter, 40% water. So you buy a tonne, you've effectively got 600 kilos of manure, and then another year you might buy off the same place and it's 50-50. So you buy a tonne, you've only got 500. So you put them out at you put it out. You think you're putting out at the same rates, but you're not. I was talking to Blake yesterday with poultry. Depending on how soon he spreads it coming out of the shed, a cubic metre of poultry manure can either weigh half a tonne or 1 tonne. And there was 6 months difference. The one that was weighing 1 tonne had just sat for 6 months. So to spread those two products at the same rate, he would have had to halve the rate of the second lot of material. So one of the difficulties once we move to these products is getting them spread. I saw some work done just recently on that, and they looked at the spread, and in fact I think it was of cattle manure, and the vast bulk of the material ended up going behind the spreader, and so it wasn't spread evenly. So you were getting these clumps, so you'd get variation across the paddock in how it performed. But for those manures, I'd certainly suggest you contact Fiona Leach at LLS, yes.
Right, thank you, Phil. Phil, quick question here from Ian. He wants to know about clover seed inoculation. Is the seed company inoculant enough?
I'd say yes.
Yep.
I think some of the work that's been done of late, it has surprised people when seed's just put out and hasn't been inoculated, and then they've gone and looked. In fact, the right rhizobia was in the soil. So if your country's had a history of clover and the clover looks good, you're going to have plenty of rhizobia there for that. And there's even sometimes I've put clover out without even getting inoculated. I'll get it treated for ants because I've seen ants move all my seed within 24 hours and put it down the nests. Yes, the answer to your question.
Thanks, Phil. Phil, question from Barry. Now Barry's left, it's quite a long question. It's got a few different parts to it, a few comments, but I think it's a good one. So just stick with me. Barry thanks you for the talk. He wants you to comment on the direction to take if you have paddocks dominated by African lovegrass that have volcanic soils and no fertiliser history. Barry says that should we control the lovegrass or apply single super? The lovegrass, if kept short, provides good summer feed. Could you sub these paddocks after lovegrass has become dormant in the late autumn after removing all the lovegrass growth?
Yeah, well, he certainly asked a difficult one. The answer to his question was simply yes, you can. The major challenge you've got with lovegrass is that you have this enormous residue left over at the end of summer, which will just shade any seedling out. So if we're going to have success in what he was trying to do, we've got to be in a situation that when we put that sub-clover out, there's light getting to the ground. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but there needs to be light getting to maybe 70% of the ground, such that, because that sub-clover seedling's got to have light. If it hasn't got light, it's not going to go anywhere. That's the challenge of dealing with African lovegrass. Now, I've seen paddocks in the south of the ACT where lovegrass has been around for a long time, where people are sort of maintaining a status quo. The lovegrass is not getting any worse, but it's certainly not getting any better. They've got other perennial grasses in there, and they've got clovers in there, and they're fertilising it, and the paddock's just at a sort of an even state. But at least they're getting productivity off it, and as was said, over summer it provides good feed, and when it does, you want to utilise it. But it's not an easy thing to manage. Yeah, but the secret is you're just trying to get rid of that overburden, so whatever seeds you put in the autumn and winter have got a chance to grow before the next growth season starts of the lovegrass.
Right, yeah, well, thanks, Phil. Phil, a quick question here from Philip. Now he's asked, what can be done with very poor soils where the only species that persist are sorrel, silvergrass, capeweed and such? They're very light sandy risers.
Rightio. We definitely have soils out there where the major problem is nothing to do with fertility and all to do with water holding capacity. And you might well have described some soils where you might even be questionable trying to do something with. If those soils won't hold moisture for the grasses or clovers to grow well, fertility can't overcome that. So I've certainly seen cases where we can do all we like with fertility and we can put seed there, but if that soil's just that free draining, it's an uphill battle. I don't know where the producer was. The one thing I have seen is that some people in the Gunning district have used the sludge out of Sydney sewage works. And the major benefit of that, you're putting out about 60 tonne of it per hectare, that's a wet weight. The major benefit was that it gets a heap of organic matter in the top part of the profile and in fact improves water holding capacity. And then suddenly that country can benefit from the fertility you then get a benefit from. And it's on some of the paddocks, it's almost as if the sewage sludge was just enough to get things up and going, and then over time the plants will build up the organic matter to help with the water storage. So it's a good point in that there are cases when fertility won't fix the problem because it's a problem unrelated to fertility.
That's spot on. Thanks, Phil. Phil, a question here from Terry. In a dry land cereal canola rotation, around about 300 to 400 mil rainfall, they only have a pasture, say, every 4 years. The question is there better sown pasture than, say, Moby, barley and vetch to maximise production and profit?
Well, you've certainly stretched me in terms of my expertise, but considering the environment and the choices you would have in terms of pasture species, I think that mixture you were talking about has a lot of logic. I suppose really what you're trying to do is get some nitrogen back in the system, in a little bit of organic matter. Once you get into those sort of rainfall areas, your options are very limited to what's going to come away. By the sounds of it, I think you've tried a number of things, and I would back your own judgment over anything I can say to you.
Thanks, Phil. Phil, question here, again, you might interpret it better than I can, from Ian. If 1 tonne of lime to the hectare will reduce aluminium to under 2%, then is it better than 2 tonne to the hectare for phalaris pasture sowing?
I think I'll use some. I'm at Rugby, so we're halfway between Crookville and Burrawa. There's certainly in there on granites, we've got country which in the top sort of 10 to 15 centimetres, the pH is in 4.5, etc. But below that, the country goes back to sort of 5.5. That's country where if I was sowing it down and I put 2.5 tonnes of lime on, I'm in fact going to go a fair way to correcting that 15 centimetres which has become acid. And it might last a long time because you haven't got this inherent acidity underneath sort of coming up and challenge you. So that's a case where I might go with a 2.5. But if I'm broadcasting lime, say in a spring on the assumption I'm sowing a pasture the next autumn, and I've got acidity to depth and aluminium to depth, the way I sort of think through, what I'm trying to do is make the environment where the seedling's going to be more a better environment for that young, sensitive plant to establish. And a tonne of lime to the hectare might do that. It's not going to progress down the profile, but that wasn't what I was after. So it's this case at present, you know, in pastures I simply must have got the lowest rate of return, because if we've got to put lime in the system and the cost of seed, etc., we've got a very, very big upfront cost. If we can start dropping some of that upfront cost because we're achieving what we need from liming, but we're not going overboard, suddenly our return on doing something with the pasture is going to improve. So that's one thing. I was with a group of producers the other day, and a few of them made comment they've moved over to sowing the acid-tolerant phosphorus varieties, and their view is, and they'll go with that. They'll go with cocksfoot, which is pretty tolerant to acidity, aluminium already, and some clovers. Their view now is with that acid-tolerant line, they're getting as good of establishment without liming as they are if they limed. So these producers have now, and these producers are sort of in the Yass-Burra area, these producers are now dropping the lime out of the system completely, and they're going with that new acid-tolerant phosphorus variety. So that's their experience.
Yeah, right.
But if someone came to me and said, no, look, I really want to put some lime out to save the pasture, I'd say fine, just have a think about how much you put out.
Right, that's an interesting one, and no doubt there's a fair bit more to it than what meets the eye. Question here, Phil, from Nick. Do you recommend applying microorganisms into the soil to increase activity to unlock P? If so, what time of the year would be best, and what sort of product would you use?
Rightio. Back in the mid-2000s, I tested a number of these products that are on the market, biological sprays. The net result was that I didn't find one that made any difference to the control treatments. So I'd say that. The one thing I did find very interesting when I bought a number of those products and talked to the suppliers, virtually no one made any comment to me about the volume of water I should be putting to spray it out onto, or what sort of conditions, you know, whether I should do it at night or during rain or whatever. When I was doing some of the work, I thought, I just can't see, you know, the amount of water was so small and conditions were such that I thought it dried out. So I have never seen a result of making anything different. What we do know very strongly though is if we increase the organic matter in the soil, we build our microbial activity. That's a given. The more organic matter, the bigger that population will be. That population will be different in different parts of the state, in different parts of pH, and within the microorganisms family, they have the capacity, if one of them's not there, another one has the capacity to sort of pick up and do the job that the other one does. These things are incredibly flexible, and on that screen there, Alan Richardson spends a fair bit of time talking about the whole microbe story. I think Alan's most likely done more work than anyone in Australia, or as much as anyone in Australia on soil microbes. So have a look at his talk.
Spot on. Thanks, Phil. A question here, probably more for me. Scott asks, so I said he's having a bit of trouble locating the 5 Easy Steps guide on the MLA website. Yes, Scott, I'll email you a copy of that decision support tool. Actually, I'll go a step further. If anyone here, a carrot on the stick, if you leave a survey response, everyone who leaves a survey response, I'll email you a copy of the 5 Easy Steps tool. So that'll be our thanks for you leaving that information there. Phil,
I must admit, it's slightly annoying if they've hidden it. I did find it, but it wasn't in the most sensible spot. So it'd be nice if they put it in a slightly easier spot to find.
Well, that's spot on, Phil. I'll have a chat to the I know the people there who work in the MLA website, so I'll let them know. A question here from Kayleen. Would you sow lucerne as part of a pasture mix with cocksfoot?
Can we get some idea of where Kayleen is in terms of locality?
Yeah, Kayleen, you just flick us another question there. Let us know where you are, and we'll come back to that question. Question here from Michael. How do you treat seed for ants or on the seed, or is there another method?
I just get that done by the resellers. There's the standard treatments. Oh, look, I forget the name, but if you go in and if I was getting clover seed treated, I just get the Rolls Royce treatment.
Yeah.
And it doesn't add much, but it just increases your chance of success.
Righto, spot on. Thanks, Phil.
I have in some small plot work, the seed was coloured a bright colour for a particular reason. In less than 24, we put the seed out late one afternoon, and by 10 o'clock the next morning, there was not one piece of clover seed left on the plots. It was all sitting around the various ants' nests. And of course they stood out a mile away because the seed was a really, really bright colour. And they just cleaned up every single piece of seed in less than 24 hours. That seed wasn't treated.
Yeah, right, yeah, okay. Just going back to Kayleen's question there, Phil, she's let us know that she's on the Monero just outside of Cooma, so it's about whether you'd sow loose.
Yeah. Obviously, the reason I was just wanting to be sure, the major thing you need for successful lucerne paddocks is that you have no aluminium to depth. Lucerne will get its roots down and it just doesn't like aluminium. That's one plant that hasn't got the capability. So often I see people put lucerne in paddocks which is never going to be successful. You can put all the lime you like up on the top, but that lucerne's going to get a lot deeper than that. If it hits aluminium there, it's not really a lucerne plant. It's a case of you could certainly do it. My feeling would be over time, some parts of your paddock will become cocksfoot dominant and some parts will become lucerne dominant, and I don't think there'll be much area in between, which is a nice mix. That's been my experience of those when you put those two together. I think something like that, I would go and talk to some of your some of your resellers, good resellers down there, and just get their experience. I certainly understand why people are wanting to put something else in with the lucerne. There might be some better options than cocksfoot. I haven't seen that being a successful mix.
Right, yeah. Well, thanks, Phil. Phil, a question here from Dan. Now, I know Dan. G'day, Dan. Good to hear you. And I know he's up your way. Is it worthwhile putting MO super out if there's already good clover growing already?
Right. The MO is purely for that the nodule and the fixing of atmospheric nitrogen. So clover, it's not necessarily benefiting the clover that much. It's really there for the nodulation process, the fixing of atmospheric nitrogen. Look, my view is that you don't want to put MO out more than the gap needs to be at least, I think, 6 years. If you've done that for a number of years, so you might have had 2 or 3 applications, that gap can most likely widen out to maybe 10 years. And it's interesting when Richard Simpson went back and looked at some of the work that was done in this area on molybdenum back in the late 50s and 60s. That's exactly what he found in the work, that there was a requirement to put it out regularly for a while, but then the gap after that became bigger. It's hard to gauge. Normally, what I've done is I just mix up some molybdenum. You can get it in a form. The product's gone off my head. And just spray it out, and I'll just see, am I getting a response in the treated areas from the clover. In the early years, what you see is a big increase in leaf size. As it gets on, it's not as important, but it is an important player in this whole nodulation. So we had a bit of a chat earlier about the nodules and the pH, etc. Some of the work that the LLS staff have been doing, one of the other things they've found is a lot of these samples they're finding which nodulation isn't good are also places where people have not put MO out for a long, long time. Leave it there.
Spot on. Thanks, Phil. Phil, we're getting pretty close to the end here, which is great. Now, thanks for answering all these questions. Just a quick one here from Barbara. What about fecal egg counts? What about fecal eggs and problems using dung and human manure? Humanure. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a word. Humanure.
Well, it could be human. So if we're talking about the sludge out of Sydney, that's been composted for a while. So we'd actually go through a process to ensure that there are no pathogens being passed through the system. So I'd go back 20 years. The department was involved in a huge trial just north of Goulburn, looking at all these aspects from Sydney manure. That was all the work that had to be done before the EPA would allow it to be used. So all of that was taken account of. If we're getting manure from other premises, by the time it comes, we're not going to have a problem with worm eggs. They'll no longer be viable by the time they get there. They get to the pasture, so it's not an issue.
Right, yeah. That's spot on. Thanks, Phil. Phil, that actually brings us to the end of the questions. I don't know if anyone's got a last-minute burning question they haven't asked yet, but that's the end of them for the time being. Now, I want to reiterate there that we've got that webinar next week with Andrew Woods presenting on where wool quality discounts are at and what this might mean for your management. So great webinar, Wednesday next week at the same time, 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, and jump on board there. And if anyone wants to have got friends or family, colleagues that may be interested, don't be afraid to put them onto the webinar link and they can register and participate as well. Now, don't forget to leave a survey response at the end of the webinar. It means a fair bit to us. We take heed of the responses there and adjust things or tweak things as we need to meet the greater audience. Now, and if you leave one, I'll send you the MLA 5 EV Steps tool. Now, Phil, I think we're done. There's no other questions come through here. Everyone seems to be signing off. We've got one quick one here. I'm looking for a legume pasture in a cropping phase that has one more winter production than arrowroot clover for 1 year. I'll go again with it.
Yeah, no, we want more. We want a variety that can give us more winter production. It's only for 1 year. Look, if they got access to my email anywhere, Dave,
I can give them access to your email if you want.
Yeah, look, just drop us an email. I'm starting to get a bit brain dead, and I don't want to make a comment that I haven't thought through properly. So right at present, I can't give you an answer to that.
No, it's completely fine.
Drop us an email, and I'll get you an answer.
No dramas. Well, thank you for that. That's good of you. I'll get that. I'll get your email to this particular person after the webinar. Well, I think we should wrap it up at that. It's been an excellent night, and Phil, you'll be glad to know that you've had the record participation. So
that could also be due to your efforts in publicity, Dave.
Or maybe I think maybe a bit of both. But I think it was a good topic, and people valued your contribution on it. So well done there, and we hope that we can build on this sort of participation into the future for future webinars. So on behalf of the audience, on behalf of myself and MLA AWI, thanks for presenting with us tonight. And,
my pleasure.
And also thanks from Phil to the rest of the audience. Thank you so much for jumping on board there and being part of tonight. Your participation is very important, make sure that your levies are being used responsibly, and it lets MLA and AWI know that they're getting some return on their investment into these webinars. So have a good evening, and we'll see you on Wednesday next week at the same time. Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.